Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of How History Will Travel. I'm your host, the Wilder historian, Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I wrapped up the Second Battle of Deep Bottom. Now I'm starting to cover the Battle of Globe Tavern, also known as the Battle of the Weldon Railroad. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from one of my online stores. Every little bit helps. Thank you. The majority of the fighting at the Second Battle of Deep Bottom occurred on August 16th. By that point, General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant and Army of the Potomac Commander George Meade pulled the 5th Corps under Gouverneur K. Warren out of their entrenchments and put them in reserve, letting the 18th Corps and the 9th Corps stretch themselves out to cover the Union entrenchments from the Appomattox River to the Jerusalem Plank Road. Grant and Meade hoped that with the 2nd Corps drawing Confederate troops from Petersburg, that Warren would have a great opportunity to slash at the Petersburg, also known as the Weldon Railroad. And to go even further, if enough troops were drawn away from the Petersburg front, Warren could flank the Confederates out of their entrenchments. As Second Deep Bottom was being fought, intelligence reports came in to Grant and Meade that they had identified brigades from Hill's Corps which guarded Petersburg north of the James River, and it appeared that more were headed that way. Grant, though not completely convinced enough troops had left the city, released Warren on his attack. On August 18th, before Warren left, tools and implements to destroy the railroad tracks were distributed to his men, and then they set off at 4 a.m., with the leading troops making it to the general area around Globe Tavern by a little after 7 a.m. Confederate cavalry guarded the railroad, but Warren's men pushed them out of the way and began dismantling the tracks. One soldier recalled, "At the word of command, every man took hold of the rail and lifted the track, ties and all, bodily from the roadbed, while the troops on the right rolled the huge ladder in one direction. Those on the left rolled it in the opposite direction, forming an immense screw, until finally it was forced to pieces. When the ties were gathered together in piles short distances apart, and the rails laid crossways on top, and fires applied, and the destruction was complete. The rails, becoming red hot in the middle, were taken off and bent round and round a telegraph pole or a tree most convenient, and not a rail left was used again. Charles Griffin's division stayed near the Globe Tavern and kept destroying the tracks, while Warren prepared the rest of his corps to push north in an attempt to flank the Confederates in Petersburg. He sent Romaine Ayres's division north along the railroad to attack rebel skirmishers, but the terrain and heavy forest disrupted their battle line, placing Joseph Hayes's brigade out front, with Nathan Duchesne's brigade behind them about 70 yards, and the 15th New York Heavy Artillery, constituting Ayres's 3rd Brigade, even further back. Next, Crawford's division was supposed to move up and extend Ayres's line to the right, but the heavy rain and terrain led to miscommunication and ill-timed movements, resulting in Peter Lyle's brigade moving to the right of Ayres, but produced a 160-yard gap in the line. The other brigades of Crawford's division also began their mistimed movement. The whole movement by Warren's corps was observed by Confederate cavalry, and that information was relayed to Pierre-Gustave Toutant-Beauregard in Petersburg. The Confederacy possessed a little over 3 divisions in Petersburg, with the rest north of the James River, dealing with Winfield Scott Hancock during the Second Battle of Deep Bottom. Not exactly knowing how large of a force it was, but knowing that it was significant enough to threaten the railroad, and too large of a threat for just cavalry to throw back, Beauregard dispatched Henry Heath with 2 brigades down the railroad to confront Warren. The rebels of Robert Mayo and Joseph Davis slammed into the blue troops, sending Hayes's men in a rout south, opening up a wide gap between Duchesne's Marylanders and Lyle's brigade to the east. The men from Maryland held off Davis's Mississippians and North Carolinians, but Mayo's troops began to hit them in the flank, using the widening gap between them and Crawford's division. The musketry became so hot that 7 color bearers from the 1st Maryland were shot down by the time Duchesne ordered a retreat from the field. The retreat quickly became a rout as the rebels bore down on them with their weapons in close pursuit. A member of the 39th Massachusetts recalled his wounding. Just as I rose, a bullet struck me in the right side, broke the 8th rib, and entered the lower lobe of the lung. I was taken off the field, along with the colonel, to the field hospital just back of us. Sergeant Elbridge Bradshaw and Private George N.B. Thomas, both of Company H, were leading me, and while thus supporting me, the latter was shot in the wrist, in consequence of which, hesitating a moment, he was captured. The Union brigades began to reform to defend themselves against the approaching Confederates, but reinforcements were desperately needed. Ayres called on Warren to send additional troops. Warren, before Ayres ever asked, sent William Hoffman's brigade of Lysander Cutler's division to aid Ayres's men, positioning them between the 15th New York Heavy Artillery and Duchesne's brigade. When word got to Warren from Ayres asking for reinforcements, he sent Edward Bragg's brigade, which included what was left of the famed Iron Brigade, to the east side of the railroad, with Crawford's division extending the Union line to the east. Warren also dispatched James Gwynn's brigade to support Crawford. Before Warren marched his men to Globe Tavern, Meade informed him that the Fifth Corps would have to fend for itself, being too far away from any immediate support, so Warren left the rest of Griffin's division where it was to guard the flank of his corps. Warren rode to the front to examine his lines. When he did, a rebel bullet hit his horse Whitey between the eyes, bringing down both horse and rider. Miraculously, both horse and rider survived. The bullet ricocheted off the horse's skull, and the animal was able to go right back to carrying Warren around the battlefield. It was about 2:30 p.m., and Heath's troops were now brought to a halt, but they performed admirably. Outnumbered 3-1, Heath's two brigades drove the Federals back 700 yards. At around 4 p.m., Warren was ready to make a push to regain the territory lost to Heath. Crawford's reinforced division outflanked Mayo's brigade and forced Davis's men back as well, establishing a solid defensive position. But Crawford's right flank was in the air, vulnerable to an attack. Ayres's men, although ordered to advance at the same time as Crawford, waited until nightfall to move out. On the Confederate side, Alfred Colquitt's brigade arrived near the end of the day, but did not engage other than sending out some skirmishers. The heavy attacks and Heath's report to Beauregard signaled to Robert E. Lee that he needed to move more troops toward Petersburg. Although Meade and Grant told Warren that the Fifth Corps would have to go it alone at the Globe Tavern, they worked tirelessly to give him reinforcements. They took a division from Hancock across the James River, but knowing it would be useless because of the exhaustion by the time it got to Warren, they decided to use the 18th Corps Reserve to replace some 9th Corps troops that would be sent to Warren instead.